A far-left terrorist, an Antifa BLM extremist, took a Molotov cocktail and threw it into a police vehicle. Uruj Rahman was quite drunk during George Floyd riots, court filings show. The Washington Free Beacon reports firebombing attorney begs for light sentence, citing inebriation and unprocessed trauma. This young woman says that she was simply trying to defend black people from this police force that had nothing but disdain for them. So in other words, she admitted to terrorism. Yet she was still able to get a sweetheart deal, they call it, a maximum of 5 years. Now, I think it's like, what are they asking for, 18 to 24 months? I'm not here to report specifically on this. I think it's important you know this and we talk about it. But we have another story that I think is interesting. And there's a moral and philosophical question that emerges. From Esquire. Judge cuts to the quick of the Stop the Steal riot, sentencing Iowa man to 7 years. What are your thoughts? It's interesting. You have the political ramifications of both. One may be worse than another, depending on what you think. A man fighting with a cop. Let's just imagine there's a guy with a stick assaulting an officer. It's bad. You should be criminally charged for this. You should probably do time. It's a violent offense. Is it as bad as throwing a Molotov cocktail into a police car, however? Because that's not just attempting to kill officers, but also destruction of property. A lot of destruction. I suppose then you can counter with yes, but the assault on the officer was at the Capitol and it disrupted the electoral vote count. I mean, that is a strike against the soul of this nation. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to assert it one way or another. I'm curious as to what you think. I want to take a look at this Uruj Rahman and, talk about what she did and how there is basically a bias in favor of the far left terrorists. So I've got more stories for you. But I wanted to introduce these two stories before we get started to ask you one simple question. Would you agree to a prisoner swap? I was thinking about this. People say, oh, the left, they get a sweetheart deal. They get let go. They don't get arrested. They win. And in fact, during the inauguration of Donald Trump in 2017, several hundred black-clad Antifa rampaged through D.C., smashing things, starting fires. I was there. I was actually arrested on that day, not charged or processed. Ultimately was released after like an hour or two because I had a press card on me. But it was officially stated by multiple officers it was an arrest. A lot of people don't seem to understand this. Arrest doesn't mean you get charged or processed. It means they are moving forward. You cannot leave. You're under arrest, right? Detained, you can eventually leave. Arrest, you can't. But they ended up cutting me loose. Anyway, I digress. I watched all of that happen. And so I was thinking about that degree of violence that these people got away with. These people in D.C. ended up suing the city and winning, I think, like $1 million. I don't know how it got paid out, but a lot of these people not only committed these acts of terror, but got paid for it. And so I thought about the double standard. Then I thought about if two separate powers were in conflict, how would this play out? Well, the left would say, we've got your boy here and we'll give him to you in exchange for our girl. What then would happen is these people would be free. I mean, maybe there's some detainment or whatever, but I look at, say, Russia and the U.S. and when we do prisoner swaps, like these individuals are free. But we have a parent authority here in the United States government that says neither of them can go free. Just an interesting thought. Not that it's something that's actually possible under our unified legal system, but I'm curious. Would you be willing to say that you would let this woman out of jail if it meant that guy got out of jail? I know in any real prisoner swap, it would be like changing territories or whatever. I'm just curious if you think it would be worth it. And I'm curious your thoughts, comment below, on the severity of each crime and which you think is worse and why. Here's the story from the Washington Free Beacon. A left-wing lawyer who pleaded guilty to firebombing a police cruiser is asking for a commutation of her sentence. Okay, she outright says, I should be free to go, pointing to the fact that she was inebriated at the time of the offense and coping with unprocessed trauma, according to court filings. Attorneys for Uruj Rahman argue that self-described human rights activist was numb, dissociated, and inebriated when she threw a Molotov cocktail into a New York City police car during the George Floyd riots in May 2020. Wasn't she also handing them out to other people? Lawyers say Rahman was also reeling from her many abusive partnership relationships and processing early trauma from being taunted as a Muslim after 9/11. On the night of May 29th, 2020, Rahman became quite drunk after drinking vodka on an empty stomach with fellow lawyer and later getaway driver Colin Mattis. Rahman's attorneys say the pair's decision to firebomb an NYPD cruiser was an aberrational act meant to protect others from future police violence. What an amazing argument for commutation. The police are the bad guys. Let me go. Yes, I'm sure the government will agree to that. Quote, tossing the Molotov cocktail was a way of expressing anger at those police officers around the country for whom black lives did not matter. Rahman's attorneys wrote in a September memo to U.S. District Judge Brian Cogan. It was an act of protest intended to avoid exposing others to harm. Oh, that explains it. As crime is skyrocketing and people are being murdered and pushed onto the subway tracks. Ah, yes. This woman says the appropriate thing to do is attack the cops. Look, cops ain't perfect. Cops are people. You take a look at what's going on now, and I got to say, y'all were probably better off, I guess. Here we go. Oh, this is amazing. Rahman's attorneys have requested she be released on time served, saying her conduct that night was a marked deviation from her otherwise exemplary life. I'm sorry. She committed an act of terrorism. The request for a special dispensation builds on a sweetheart deal already reached by Justice Department prosecutors in this case. In June, Rahman and Mattis entered into a second plea agreement that broke their potential 10-year sentences down to a maximum of 5 years. Prosecutors want Judge Cogan to go even lower, arguing for just 18 to 24 months based on the history and personal characteristics of the defendant. Excuse me? The history and personal characteristics? That's amazing, isn't it? What are they basically saying? They're marginalized people. They should be let go. A deviation from an otherwise exemplary life. Rahman and Mattis each confessed to counts of conspiracy to commit arson and to making and possessing an unregistered destructive device. Dodging a previous domestic terrorism sentencing enhancement, the two had pleaded guilty in October 2021 to one count of possessing or making a destructive device, which could have earned them each 10 years in prison. You want to know why you don't release them? Let me tell you why you don't release them and you make them serve out their sentences. Now, I think we need prison reform. I think a lot of people that are in prison probably shouldn't be, and a lot of people who should be probably aren't. Violent offenders should be in longer, and nonviolent offenders should be in lesser. I believe if you're a nonviolent offender, house arrest. That's it. Simply put, ankle bracelet, house arrest. Why not? No, for real. I mean, in almost all circumstances. Why should the state be paying for you to live your life? The real concern is we don't want you committing more crimes. We want to see rehabilitation. I don't think prisons do this. So how about this? I ain't going to pay for it. Why are the taxpayers paying for you committing crimes? I'll tell you what we're going to do. You can't leave your house. There you go. You stay at your house, you play video games, you read books, you watch movies, maybe you do some work online, but you can't leave. Or maybe it's controlled release, meaning you're under house arrest. You can only leave to go to work. Hey, man, I think that works. We're talking about nonviolent offenses, okay? Especially if you're somebody who was like, a pickpocket or a shoplifter. It's like, all right, you did victimize people. So now we're going to keep an eye on you. It's substantially cheaper to do it this way. A violent offender who lit Molotov cocktails and threw them into a police cruiser is the kind of person you want to lock up for longer. Why? You release this person, she goes and coordinates and organizes. You do not want violent terrorists being released into the public. As for this right-wing guy who was assaulting an officer and fighting on January 6th, I also think he should be in jail. Violent offenders are the problem. And some people want to argue that January 6th was like a redress of grievances. Spare me, dude. Trying to storm into the Capitol, and I'm talking about all of the people on January 6th, that we understand. Many of them were bumbling around and the doors were opened by cops. But other people fighting their way in, what did you think was going to happen? You stand in a building and then all of a sudden you're in charge? It's just so stupid. All that did was hurt Trump's cause. It actually hurt his chance of getting reelected. So these people not only harmed the MAGA Republicans and their movement, but they physically attacked people. Sorry, no sweetheart deals as far as I'm concerned. Although I will say 7 years is a bit harsh, to be honest. Since their arrest, Rahman and Mattis have won the sympathy of national media and liberal elites. New York Magazine, NPR, and other outlets have run favorable profiles of the two. Rahman has remained under house arrest with electronic monitoring since June 2020, when a former Obama administration intelligence official helped post her bail, $250,000. Absolutely incredible. These people want the terror, the crime, and the violence. And y'all in New York City keep voting for it. Fine. I don't care. I don't live there. You want to abolish the police? Go ahead and do it. And if you're a cop and you're in New York and you're sitting by watching this happen, yo, lady threw a Molotov cocktail into a car you could have been sitting in. But fine. Prop the system up. Bravo. Give me a call when your spine grows back. The defenders have said the Trump administration wished to make a political example of the pair, bringing federal charges for a crime that is usually dealt with by local authorities. Rahman's attorneys in their memo argued the defendant had received harsher treatment compared with another federal case involving an NYPD van firebombed in July 2020. Rahman's attorneys also say their client's commitment to social justice should earn her a more lenient sentence. I disagree. Social justice? You were committing terror in the name of your social justice. No. It should warrant a harsher sentence because you're a political extremist. They say prosecutors who first took up the case emphasized Rahman and Mattis had a higher obligation to uphold the rule of law. The two abdicated their responsibilities as attorneys when they chose to not only throw, but make and distribute the Molotov cocktails. A witness testified that Rahman passed the explosives out earlier to rioters. That's distribution. Come on. Prosecutors also revealed text messages between Rahman and Mattis showing they planned the attack. Bring it to their neck, Mattis texted Rahman before sharing the location of police headquarters. Molotov's rollin', Rahman responded. I hope they burn everything down. Need to burn all police stations down and probably the courts too. Prison. Prison for these people. Look, I understand cops ain't perfect. A lot of them are bad and the system is broken. That's why I'm a reformer, not a violent revolutionary. And I think reform wins. Throughout the history of the United States, evidence suggests that reform has won. Now, I understand we are birthed of revolution. That I get. But that was not without lack of trying. The founding fathers repeatedly made petitioned for a redress of grievances against the crown. And the crown ignored it. So finally, they're just like, OK, we're independent. And when the founding fathers declared independence, the crown still ignored it. Read the history on this stuff. It's really amazing stuff. It was King George III, I believe. And he was just like, I don't care. I have other things to worry about in Europe. But it was a problem enough. And they said, we'll dispatch regulars to stop this. And it was war. France, seeing an opportunity to disrupt Britain, who they were at war with, seeing an opportunity to find new allies, aligned themselves with the colonists. And now they had they had allies in their war with Britain, and Britain was distracted. Well, there you go. Right? There's a lot of reasons why things like that happen. There have been violent riots. There's been a civil war. I understand this country is wrought with violence, and there have been wars. But the overwhelming majority of change in this country came through reform, not overthrowing government. There were two such incidents, the Revolution and the Civil War. The Revolution was 13 colonies, and there were many more British colonies, mind you, saying outright, we done. And a war for independence was fought. The Civil War was not like traditional civil war. A faction of states broke off from the Union and declared themselves a new union, a confederacy. The traditional union, I suppose you'd call it, the union itself, said, no, you can't do that. We have sacrificed blood and treasure for your admittance. And to leave would be tantamount to theft. It's basically what Ulysses S. Grant wrote. I believe this was after the war. And so the Union said, we're not going to allow Southern states to secede. The South was trying to break away from the country. They lost. But this was violent, extremely violent, and it brought about extremely important change. So I can certainly recognize sometimes there are wars and death that can lead to a positive in the end. A lot of bad came from the Civil War, but it ended slavery, and it should have been ended a long time ago. Many other Commonwealth countries, I believe the Commonwealth itself ended slavery in something like 1820, in the 1820s or like late 1810s. I don't know the exact date because we're America. 1865 is when the war finally ended. 1863, I believe, was the Emancipation Proclamation. And then they say that Juneteenth was officially the end of slavery because slaves were still in Texas not realizing what had happened. But anyway, I digress. Most of what happens in this country that brings about positive change is reform. But we also have to recognize that we are in a stagnant position and people are just unhappy with how things are going. Congress is deadlocked declaring war. Not declaring war, but war is being declared in our name. So people are rightfully angry. I just don't think destroying and burning things down solves the problem. Rahman was due at sentencing in a Brooklyn federal court on Thursday, but successfully petitioned for the hearing to be moved to November 9th. So let's see. Will she get a sweetheart deal? Suspect who admitted to politically motivated car attack on slain Republican teen released on bail. The most shocking thing about this story, most of you know by now, was that this guy, Shannon Brandt, thought that he would get a leniency. I read one report where they said that in his sentencing or in his bail hearing, he was surprised that he was actually being held to account, as if he thought killing this teenager was a good thing he would be celebrated for. So, yeah. And here's a question. Would you trade either one of these for this guy? Here's my attitude. This dude, what's this guy's name? They say the committee, blah, blah, blah. Seditious conspiracy trials in federal court. Stuart Rhodes, blah, blah, blah. Judge Amy Berman Jackson, whose big bag of Fs has been empty, composed a brilliant overture of the Oath Keepers trial. Kyle Young, the insurrectionist thug who did no little damage to Metro Police Officer Michael Fanone. So he's receiving a 7-year sentence. I believe he should be in prison for showing up at the Capitol and attacking police. I think the January 6th trials are overzealous, to say the least, tyrannical to a great degree. Many of these people had no idea what was going on. They were just walking around. But you need to understand, man, we had on Podium Guy. I know it was a lectern, but they call him Podium Guy. And he said he knew they were fighting and there was violence and broken glass, and he walked through it. You knew. You knew. And so the dude went to prison. I recognize that if people are storming a building and smashing it and you watch it happen and then you're like, I'm going to go in. Yeah, you committed a crime. I wonder how many people pretending to be journalists were filming this and entered the building and are now really worried because they're not credentialed journalists. I wonder. Because we did see that guy, John Sullivan, Antifa protester or whatever, but he was there saying he was a journalist. He was criminally charged. Here's what I think. A lot of these people on the other side of the building had the doors open for them, had no idea what was going on. A lot of people on one side of the building were fighting with cops. Arrest those guys, lock them up. But what we can see with many of these January 6 defendants, some of them haven't even been charged yet, and they're sitting in solitary. That's crazy. Some of these people are being horribly mistreated, and there's reports now that some people are being tortured. This woman firebombed a police cruiser, and she wants commutation, time served. It's amazing. Basically arguing for 2 years. That's it. I'm done. I'm good. Let me go. You serious? You were looking at 10 or more for terrorism. Yo, this is why I don't want to live in New York City. I was there. Bombs went off. I mentioned this stuff. I have curios, mementos from the various news stories that I've experienced or covered. I have police tape that was just blowing in the wind, dangling in the trash after a black nationalist executed 2 cops. And I see this kind of stuff happening, and I say, I don't want to live in this city. And I was right. Because it was only a couple of years later, the Summer of Love happened. The 5/29 insurrection. They say that January 6th was an insurrection. On 5/29, far leftists stormed the barricades of the White House, firebombed a guard post, and set fire to St. John's Church. The president was forced into a bunker. At the same time, around the country, cities were engulfed in flames. A young woman firebombed a police cruiser with an accomplice and handed out Molotovs. What did these people think they were doing? It's some of the worst rioting we've seen in decades. That was an insurrection. I think the left is going to be given leniency. That's what we see. They might say, you know what? We think you're good. They're going to let her go. Why? Because it's a civil war. Because they aren't going to imprison their own assets. That's why they lock these people up for a lot longer. So here's my question. If it were you, and you had control of this Antifa firebomber in your prison, and they came to you and said, we will let this guy, Young, out, we'll transfer him to you in exchange for her, would you do it? That's the question. Should either of these people be free? I don't know, man. I kind of think that if you're a violent criminal psychopath or, just getting violent and rioting to whatever, any degree, you should be locked up. I want to live in peace and I want to live in to the best degree that I can, safety. I recognize that comes to my responsibility to defend myself and keep and bear arms and all of those things. But it also means that if we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are a violent individual who is attacking our institutions or our individuals, then you go to jail. That's how it works. There's a photo of this woman holding the Molotov cocktail. We know that she did it. Why should she get a lenient sentence? Shannon Brandt of North Dakota admitted to what he did. Why should he be released on bail at all when trespassers are being held in solitary? Y'all best start believing in civil wars, my friends. You're in one. I have a feeling that come November 9th, we're going to have a big distraction around the midterms, and they will quietly release this young woman and say time served. Why wouldn't they? I think it's extremely likely that's what's going to happen. So we'll see. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.